Hello, everybody, and welcome back for another year of the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast. This is your host, Howard Fox. The Outdoor Adventure Series celebrates individuals and families, businesses, and organizations that seek out and promote the exploration and enjoyment of the great outdoors. Our guest today is Tom Luba. Tom is a fishing enthusiast, a Jig Craftsman, and freelance outdoor writer, and his writing focuses on open water fishing. Tom, it is a pleasure to have you on the first Outdoor Adventure Series podcast of 2022. So welcome.
Thank you.
So for our listeners, I met Tom, oh my God, it was way back early summer of last year, 2021. I had attended the Wisconsin Outdoor Communicators Association, and I had the pleasure of sitting next to Tom at the tables during the presentations and discussions, and just got to learn more about him and his passion, not only about writing and fishing, but about jig craftsmanship. And so I'm excited to kind of kick off the new year with you. So how by the way, and how have your holidays been so far?
So far, so good. A lot of busy work. We've been in Chicago. We've been back. We've been up in Michigan to pick up a great granddaughter, brought her back. So I don't know where the last 4 or 5 days went, but I spent a bunch of it in the car. In between, we had good holiday meetings with various parts of the family that
Fantastic.
Are away from where I live.
Very good. Now, up in Wisconsin, I can only imagine the snow. And you have I would imagine your shovel is out, whether it's an individual shovel or maybe you have a little tractor with the shovel, but I can imagine the snow up there.
I've had the snow shovel out. There's no doubt about that. I had it out before I talked to you this morning from the 4 inches we got overnight, and was out yesterday morning, but the 4 inches we got overnight on Sunday.
Oh, wow. Well,
we won't get anything more for a while.
Okay. Well, I tell you, here in Nevada, we had overcast skies the past couple of days, but today is blue skies. All we get is a dusting in southern Nevada on the mountains of snow. But if you go farther north to the Reno, Lake Tahoe area of the state, they're getting pummeled, and it's just unbelievable. Well, listen, since this is the first episode of the new year, and I just want to, if you would, provide for our listeners a little bit of background about yourself. And I mean, you've been writing for quite a while, but just share a little bit of an overview. You don't have to go too in depth unless you'd like to, but share with our audience a little bit about yourself.
I think the easiest way to say is right now I'm retired or semi-retired. I did work as a circulation promotion manager for magazines. And while I was doing that, I did work on some outdoor titles that we owned: Deer and Deer Hunting Magazine, Turkey and Turkey Hunting, Wisconsin Outdoor Journal. Other than that, dating way back for the last 35 years or so, I started writing about fishing because I enjoyed it. I actually did an article for sale type thing on fishing for smallmouth bass in little streams in Illinois when I was in college. And it was done for a class on magazine article writing. I actually got an A on that, and actually 6 months later sold the article. So that was kind of a good thing. Other than that, I spent better parts, not just off and on, I guess, as the spirit moved me to try various outdoor titles and write for them. So over 35 years, I've written for, I don't know, probably a dozen different magazines at one time or another. The ones I do mostly now are with the retirement aspect, and so I can write kind of what I want to at pretty much on Wisconsin Outdoors and Midwest Outdoors, both Midwestern publications.
Wow. And, I really have to share of how wonderful it is to hear that you literally spent your career doing what you love. I mean, you had the love of the great outdoors, the writing, you're in the publishing field with the magazines, and it just, I think that is a pleasure and a fortune. I think a lot of us miss today is that we get what I use my air quotes a job, and we lose sight of doing the things we love, making the time for the things we love. And if you can put those two together, that is definitely a career, and sounds like you've done it.
Yeah, the funny thing about it is that I went basically when I graduated from college at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, Illinois. I had a bachelor degree in journalism, and I was planning on being an editor at one time. And throughout my entire career of working, I don't think I ever was an editor. I think I was just about everything but. A lot of it was promotional type management. But being an actual editor in charge of a magazine on a regular basis, I never have been.
Very interesting. Now, we've had the opportunity to interview a lot of folks who are very accomplished, like yourself, outdoor writers, very much outdoor enthusiasts, a lot of different aspects of the outdoors. But one thing I've noticed is that journalism, publishing definitely is a common thread through the folks that are really heavily involved in the outdoor adventure space. Now, with your love of this fishing and open water fishing, had you always been an outdoor enthusiast? Is this something, your parents got you involved with, siblings? How did you end up just really appreciating this being in the outdoors?
Basically, when we were growing up in Illinois, there was not a lot of area to fish. We had a couple of streams that had smallmouth bass that we walked, wade. But my aunt and uncle took us on vacation from Illinois up to northwestern Wisconsin, the Hayward area for vacation, 2-week fishing vacation every summer. And that's where the love of fishing really blossomed, I would guess. And when one of the times when we were coming back, I told my aunt and uncle, I'm going to move to Wisconsin when I get old enough so I can fish all the time. Well, I
Wow.
did that, went to college, got a degree, ended up in Wisconsin, found out I couldn't fish all the time because I had to work. But I still got a lot of time in fishing. I still do.
Fantastic. Well, it's unfortunate when that job gets involved or in the way of our passion and love of fishing. And by the
Yeah.
way, I need to share a confession with you, Tom, and for our listeners, I may have shared this on other episodes, but I have never been fishing. Okay. I've never been fishing, and I would like to. I think it would be so cool. I had the opportunity to, after the conference this past year, the Woka conference, to have Patrick Durkin on the show. We talked about, he's very big in the hunting aspect
Yeah.
of game hunting, but I also had Dan Small. And I was thinking to myself after interviewing Dan, I know Dan, I know Tom, I am definitely going to the next year's meeting of at the Woka conference, and I'm going to plan a day. I'm going to get these guys to take me fishing. So I just
We got a
want you
lot
to
of
know you're
guys
on the
that
hook for that.
that's no
Figuratively
problem.
speaking, by the way.
A lot of guys that are in that group are quite accomplished in the outdoor area. So you'll learn a lot when you talk to the various people.
That's the best part about this podcast series, the Outdoor Adventure Series, is when I moved from Chicago to Las Vegas, I wanted to get outdoors, and here we've got the desert. And by the way, there is some fishing in different streams, and there's Lake Mead, and there's some natural lakes not too far from the desert in Las Vegas. But just getting to know the people in the space and the outdoors world has been very enlightening, and that was really the impetus for spinning off this outdoor adventure series, because I find it, number one, it's fascinating, and there's so many different aspects of outdoor adventure. And for you, it's been this love of fishing. And so let's talk a little bit about that. You're one of the things I learned about you, and for our listeners, is, during this conference, it was a very short conference, just a couple of days, but I had the opportunity when I chatted with Tom to learn about the fact that he made his own jigs or fishing lures. You're going to explain that one for me. But
Jig is a fishing lure.
jig is a fishing lure. Okay.
Yeah.
So for our listeners, okay, and for me, because by the way, this is going to be the educational aspect of our pre-fishing adventure. What is a fishing lure and a jig? What is it?
Well, basically, when myself and probably most people start fishing, usually you fish with a sinker and a hook on a line. And usually the sinker is above the hook, say a foot or so. And that usually is one way to get your bait to the bottom. Well, somewhere along the line, and I don't have any idea where, somebody decided that they would make that sinker and that hook meet. And they created what is called the lead head jig now. The sinker is the lead head, and the hook is what's on the jig. So it's kind of unique that somebody would have done that, but it's been a godsend to probably fishermen everywhere ever since.
And so this is the way you start. You literally are taking the bait, whatever that bait is, putting it on the end of the hook. You've got the sinker, and it's on the fishing pole. You throw the line in the water, and you hope to God some fish is going to be enticed by it and want to consume it, and you've caught yourself dinner.
Yeah, you basically on the plain hook, you use some kind of a live bait like a night crawler or a worm or something like that to coax the fish to bite. On the jig, you can do the same thing, but you can also put other things on it, various types of artificial lures like plastic grubs. You can dress the jig by putting feathers and various things on it to give it some attraction to the fish. So you can do a number of different things to get it to help you catch fish.
So I wonder if you could take us through this process, because you are making your own jigs now.
Right.
And for our listeners, we're going to have in our show notes still on Success Insight and on the Outdoor Adventure Series website, we're going to have the pictures of some of what Tom is discussing with us today. But and we'll also make available to you instructions, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But Tom, can you perhaps walk us through this process of crafting these jigs? And I guess even before you start that, when did you decide, I want to make my own? And why did you decide that, in fact?
One of the main reason that I ended up making my own was because one of the negative things about fishing a jig is that it sinks the bottom usually. And bottom is where fish live a lot of the time. It's also where all the snags are, like rocks and trees and weeds and whatever else. And after fishing for a while with jigs, you lose a bunch of snags. And then you have to basically go back and rebuy some or do whatever. And at that point in time, I thought, why don't I just make my own? Then I can do what I want when I want, and I won't run out. So I started it that way. That's how I started making them.
I, I guess a question I have to ask from a money standpoint. I mean, you've been, working 30 some years, add your natural age to it. So you've been fishing for a long time. I can
Yeah.
imagine you could be spending a lot of money on jigs over the years. And
Yeah, you would.
what, and was that was it just the constant losing of them? It's like, something, there's got to be a better way than having to go to the store, or this is costing me money. I mean, what was it was this kind of
Well,
combination of both?
yeah, it was well. And the one thing is we learned how to fish a bait called a Canadian jig fly, which consists of not flower feathers and various body winding chenille and a painted jig head. And basically, we were given some of those by a gentleman when we first started fishing jigs, and they worked so well that I figured I have to figure out how to make these myself. So I took one after it got battered and pretty much tore it apart so I could see how it was made. And from there, I started making that particular one.
Okay. And so walk us through, if you could, this process. And by the way, there'll be I may interrupt you here and there just to want to get a clarifying question in, but walk us through that process and that you have to go through.
Well, basically, the process starts with a melting pot, and you can get I have a smaller one that probably holds a couple pounds of lead that's melted, and you plug it in, and it gets hot and it melts the lead. Then you find the type of jigs you want to make, and can buy a mold for those. And from that point, you go to buying the hooks that will fit in that mold. And when you get to that point, you basically just fill in the cavities with molten lead. It sets very quickly. You open it, you pull them out, use the pliers to grab usually like six to a mold, possibly somewhere in there. And the strip across the top after you get done sort of holds it together. You can get a pliers, pull that out, set it off to the side, and now you've got 6 jigs. So
Okay.
you put hooks in again and keep repeating the process.
Okay. So, couple questions. The word lead. In my vocabulary, lead is not often a good word. Is that an
No,
issue?
it's been an issue. They haven't discontinued using it, but it is something that I know that people were concerned about waterfowl picking up a lead shot from shotguns that hit what that just happens to get in the bottom of an area where the ducks are sort of feeding, and then they end up getting sick on that. I have not heard anything on that lately, and I'm assuming that there's still nothing going on where you can't use lead. There are, however, people that have made weights with other metals like tin. They sometimes though it takes a different, to get the same size of a jig with lead, you may have to make it 1.5 times as big with tin to get the same weight. I'm not sure how that weighs out, but I think that that's part of the reason why nothing has changed dramatically since yet.
Okay.
There are
Okay.
companies that manufacture molds, and that's what they do. And haven't seen anything at all that I can recall lately about outlawing lead, basically.
Okay. So, question: the melting pot and these molds, and I would imagine, on a commercial scale, you've got the Cabela's and the Bass Pro Shops of the world, and then the local mom and pop stores. They're buying molds and putting them up, perhaps putting them up on the shelves. But are those the places where you would go to get this equipment that you need
Uh,
to make the
you
jigs?
can get some of it through them. Where I would suggest people go to look for supplies if they decide by the time we're done that they may want to try to make their own is more like I use a place called Lure Parts Online, which is a website with a catalog. I also use a site named Barlow's, Barlow apostrophe S tackle in Texas. They also have a catalog and sell a lot of this material. And I think the other one I've seen is Jan's, Jann apostrophe S, Netcraft. Those three, I think, will have most of the stuff that you would need if you are going to do this. And they include, I believe, the Lure Parts Online sells lead also. So
Okay.
you can buy lead from them.
Okay. Well, we'll definitely provide the backlinks, and we'll confirm the email addresses with you,
Yeah.
after the show, but we'll have those in the show notes. So you've got your lead, you've got your melting pot, you've got the molds that you're making. Now, I imagine this gets pretty hot. So
Yeah.
besides the pliers, I imagine you've got some good safety gloves.
Yeah. I usually have a pair of heat resistant gloves because of that. And also, you are dealing with lead. And as you take the things out of the mold, mess around with sharp hooks, a lot of times you may stick a finger and it bleeds a little bit. So you want to try to keep your hands away from the lead as much as you can.
Oh boy.
I haven't always done that, but I do a lot more of it now. Where first thing that's on once the mold gets hot is the gloves
Okay.
because I don't like burning myself.
So I imagine you have a few choice not to, they weren't factory equipment, or I'm trying to make a joke here and I'm really failing miserably, but I'm sure you have a burn there or two.
Yeah.
So what happened? So now you've got you've got the lead, the mold, you've pulled it out of the mold. And so you've got the hook. It's basically surrounded by this piece of lead. What happens next?
Well, basically, what I do after I mold them, a lot of them will come out of the mold perfect. But because when you hold the mold tight to pour the lead into it, sometimes you don't use the same strength maybe every time you pour. So maybe all of a sudden one time when you pour, you're a little bit weaker on holding the jig mold closed, and you might find a little lead that runs out the side of the mold but still attaches to the jig head. Usually at that point, it's just kind of a I don't know if they call it flashing or something like that. but I use a little cuticle clippers and usually clip that off till the jigs are basically round the way I want them. And then you can do whatever you want with them. You can take that jig as is, take it, put it on a fishing pole, take a piece of a night crawler, throw it out in the water, drag it across the bottom, and you probably will catch fish. You can also paint those a variety of different colors. And as you look at what you want to do, you can see, okay, I want to make these kind of jigs. You can look up and find out that you can make them with feathers. You can make them with the silicone skirts nowadays. You can make them with living rubber, which is also something that is these things come in strands kind of. And once you're done with them and you can tie the jig in essence to the color you want it to be. Then you can snip the edges and it comes out in individual strands. So they move through the water. And then you can do the same thing. You can use something that is artificial, like a plastic on the back of that even, or you can add live bait to it. Sometimes you can just use it as is. And depending on that, you may be able to catch fish one or two or three different ways. And there are also a number of different materials that you can use in making your jigs. You know, the silicone, the living rubber, bucktail or deer hair, turkey feathers, which are marabou. They make a real enticing. They're so light and flexible in the water that fish, they almost move on their own. And a lot of times that draws fish. So depending on what you're fishing for and what type of jigs are best for that species, you can make them however you want.
You know, that brings up a question that you set this up perfectly is how you dress up this jig is really dependent on the type of fish and
Right.
perhaps the size of the fish that
Right.
you're looking for.
And also the depth of the water, because you can make a jig that is technically 1/64th of an ounce, which you don't even hardly feel. And you can also make one that's a half ounce to an ounce, which sinks to bottom pretty quick. But if you're fishing 35 feet of water, you might want the deep one. And if you're fishing above tree brushes for panfish, for instance, like crappies, you may want the little tiny one because it'll sink slower right down to about where the crappies are sitting. So it all depends what you're fishing for. And, it's also a case too of people finding out that there's certain areas of the country that certain baits work better, and same with jigs. So you may use one type of jig in one area and a different type in another area. So there's a lot of variety in it. And there's a lot of looking at what you're trying to catch and how you're going to go about catching them.
When you go out fishing, whether it's in Wisconsin or somewhere out of state, out of country for that matter, how much research are you doing into the fish and the preferences for the jigs so that you can be as successful as possible in this experience?
I
You know,
think that's
when you,
kind of a learning process. It's like somebody said once that the way to become a better fisherman is to spend more time on the water rather than sitting at home reading about it. And that is definitely true. It just depends on as you fish, you learn. For instance, we grew up with live bait, which meant we fished for panfish, bluegills, and crappies, for instance, in shallow water in spring because they were in the spawn. But then later in the year, they'd be somewhere different in deeper water. And the same thing with bass. For instance, largemouth bass will always come shallow in the spring to spawn. You can catch them there, but after the spray, you may end up finding out that they're not there anymore. So you've got to go up 15 feet of water to the first drop off where it gets deeper, and you might find them spending the summer out around there, especially if there's weed growth or something around those areas.
when you go out, is this a solitary experience for you? Do you go out with friends, family? Is it a combination? What's your
Oh,
preference?
it's a little bit of everything. I mean, when we were younger, we grew up going out in the boat with aunt and uncle and fishing for panfish, my brother and I. So there'd be four of us in one particular boat fishing. Uh, Usually when I go fishing for bass, I will probably have one person in the boat for the most part. then basically one person fishes one bait, one first person fishes another, and you see which one might work the best. And then you can try different things. And the other thing is that I can go fishing alone. I know areas that I know I'll catch fish if I go probably. So it's just a matter of hooking the boat up and deciding to go over and fish at that particular lake or river or whatever. So it's a big deal. I mean, you can make it a family affair very easy. I think most times people trying to make it a family affair, if they don't know much about the fish and stuff like that, it turns out to be kind of a boring thing if the kids are along and they kind of walk away from it after a while.
Right.
So for me, it's been a lifelong experience that every time you go out, you learn, and the more you learn, the better you get at it.
Sure, sure. In your experience getting out on the open water, has there been a time or two when you just maybe had to take a deep breath and go, wow, that was fantastic? Anything like that come to mind?
Oh yeah, you will find your level of satisfaction changes as you get more into it. But for instance, I went to a lake that had been the water level had been dropped down. Were trying to remove some cover and stuff on it, and it was a very good lake for largemouth bass. And I was kind of disappointed when they dropped it down to the small river channel that went through it to keep water flowing. And after about 4 years, when they got done with this process, they filled it back up. And I talked to the Department of Natural Resources and I said, what happened to the bass in this lake now that it was drawn down? And they said, well, a lot of the fish, because it was a flowage type thing, went through the dam and down the river, and those fish are gone. But there were enough of them that stayed along that they will gradually start reproducing and growing again. And after waiting about 3 or 4 years for that, I talked to the DNR. They said, yeah, the fish are getting bigger up there. So the first time I took my boat out that year, I just wasn't even going to do anything except get the motor started after a long winter. But I had a fish pole with me. So I took one of the baits to one of the jigs I made and put a plastic trailer in the back of it and threw it up to an area that was fairly close to where I was at because I had fished there before. And second cast I made, all of a sudden the line started chasing right back at me to the boat. And I thought, whoa. So I reeled as fast as I could, swung back on the rod to set the hook, and almost got pulled out of the boat. It turned out to be about a 4-pound largemouth bass, which was a big fish for the north. And I wasn't expecting anything that big after going through the drawdown. But now over the last 3 years, I've been finding a lot of fish like that out there. So the lake has come back very well. So that really has astounded me living through that.
That's fantastic. And that's good. So good to hear. So in our conversation today, you were chatting about spending a fair amount of time in the car, and you mentioned the word great grandkids. So that means grandkids and kids. And how have they taken to this sport that you have really relished for your entire
Not really that well.
Okay.
But we have 3 granddaughters and a grandson up here, and the grandson does some fishing, and now he's got 2 little kids, but he's also been very, very much into hunting.
Okay.
And I find a lot of people in the state, which surprises me, since I moved up here to fish, I've met a whole lot of people in Wisconsin over 40 years that don't fish. And I always surprise me because of so many lakes and so many waters that I would think everybody would fish. But we did get the 2 of the great grandkids out a couple summers ago fishing just where anything would bite, which there's a variety of rough fish in Wisconsin waters that always seem to be biting. And they didn't know the difference, but they loved catching a fish. And I ended up getting a picture of them, and they used it on the Wisconsin cover for Midwest Outdoors in one of those issues. So I got to show the kids their 4-color picture in front of, on the cover of a magazine, and they were amazed. But I'm still trying to get them to go out a little bit more.
All right. Well, hey, Tom, if you want to adopt a 61-year-old guy, I'm that person. So when I come back up to Wisconsin, I hope to go fishing with you.
Yeah, that'd be good.
All right. Listen, in addition to the photos we're going to share on our websites, I would love if you have a photo of yourself, perhaps even with the grandkids, of if you still have the rights to that photo, we can share on our show notes as well,
Oh, sure.
because I appreciate that. In this hobby, this passion of yours, if you were going to if you're going to share with somebody who wants to get involved in fishing, in making their own jigs, what suggestions would you have for them and how to get started?
I would decide first of all if you're going to fish with them. There are that's they do sell the jigs. They're made and they're sold everywhere commercially at retail, and you can go out and buy some. And my basic feeling is if you're not sure what you want to do, best place to go is to go out and buy some jig heads, and then buy a few of the things like plastic trailers and stuff that would go on the back of the jig head, and then take them fishing. And if you catch fish, then it's an idea of, I think maybe I would like to, same reason that I went into it. I start losing my jigs. Maybe instead of losing all these things, I could invest, $100 or so and then have this thing that will allow me to make them for years and years. And that would be the best way, I think, to start. Um, I think the biggest problem people have in fishing in general is they don't know that they've got a bite, especially if they're using artificial baits. And by the time they figure it out, the fish has already dropped the bait because they can't eat it. So if you go out and fish with live bait first, so you get an idea of how the fish are biting, and then you gradually start using live bait with jigs, I think you'll have a pretty good idea that they'll bite that too because of the live bait. And then your jig would be the vehicle to get it down to the bottom in whatever depth you want it to get there. So I think that to me is the best way to look at it is this: go out, try it, see if you're going to fish, and then gradually work your way into it.
Very good. Well, I appreciate you sharing those insights as well. A question that I wanted to ask you a little earlier, and because you spent a lot of your time in Wisconsin fishing, has there been a special place out of Wisconsin where this was a wonderful experience and a place that you'd go back to in a heartbeat?
But yeah, we went down a bunch of friends in our bass club that I belong to. We've gone down to Kentucky Lake, right down, it's across the border into Kentucky from Illinois, and fished down there and never had been there before. And we caught a bunch of fish and had fun doing it. I went on my own one time because I like fishing for smallmouth bass as well as largemouth. And smallmouth bass spend more time around. The easiest way to say is more around rocks and not so much weed growth and stuff like the largemouth do. But I always wanted to fish at Dale Hollow Lake in Tennessee, which is a reservoir. And it was because the person that caught the world record smallmouth bass, which is about 11 pounds, 15 ounces or so, caught that fish in Dale Hollow Lake. So 20 years ago, took a vacation and called up or hired a guide, which is a guy that takes you fishing and knows the waters and gives you an opportunity to hopefully catch some fish. And it's probably the only time I ever hired one. But I wanted to fish down there and I wanted to catch smallmouth bass. So I hired this guy for 2 days. So I went down there and it was in early November, which was still decent weather down there. And we went out for both days fishing. The funny part about it was we didn't catch a ton of fish, but we got to one area where I was lucky enough and I used a bait that was a jig that had just come out recently back then. It was a different kind of plastic on the back of it. And that's what he had been using. So I ended up fishing that. And within 20 minutes, I caught two nice smallmouth bass that were both around the 4.5 pound range, were good fights. So I figured, okay, I caught some fish and I'm down here. I caught them in Dale Hollow and it'd be nice to catch a 5-pounder. So the next day we actually went out again and he brought some live bait with him, including one goldfish, a big goldfish they caught somehow. That was in with the minnows. So we went and fished an area that was deep and we got the bait down there and he thought, well, the goldfish is the biggest thing I've got. So I'm going to put that on the hook, see if they bite it. So we dropped that down there and all of a sudden while he was trolling along, the line started going out. You could hear it, the mechanism on the reel going click, 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 click like that, which means line was going out. So he stopped the boat and he said, okay, grab that reel in the slack and set the hook. So I did that, and then I had a nice fish on. It took a while to get him in because he was pretty deep, but it turned out to be about a 5 pound, a little bit over 5 pound smallmouth bass. So I was able to catch what I wanted to catch going down there, which was a 5 pound bass. And believe it or not, caught him on a goldfish.
Wow, that is fantastic. And
I don't
talk
think the
about,
goldfish liked it, but that was okay.
all right. You know, it really, it just listening to the conversation today, I'm thinking, I mean, it's a life well lived. I mean, you know, we have our work life. We've got to pay the bills, put, a house over, a roof over our heads. But, you know, this passion you have for fishing and just, you know, doing what you love, getting out there. I mean, that is what life is all about. And just love the stories that you have been sharing. I got a question though. You mentioned the bass club that you're a member of. Is this a big club, little club?
It's
What's
about
involved with
actually
it?
I've been in it for 30 years, and I decided I'm retiring from that this year too because I'm not fishing. They fish tournaments, which is a competitive sport in the fishing. There
Right.
are massive tournaments for a lot of different species, but bass has always been the big one. So our club had always got together, and we would fish with each other 5 or 6 or 7 times a year in tournaments. Bring the fish in, weigh them, and whoever won. And just that was kind of the camaraderie of getting together with people and learning more about the sport because you may not fish with them all the time, and maybe teaching them something because they don't fish with you all the time. But it's a good way to force yourself to fish, joining some kind of a club. And especially we've never been. Well, we all need boats to fish in a bass club tournament. There are people that have been in the club, that don't have boats for whatever reason, and we didn't just we didn't say no, you can't join because you don't have a boat. We try to work it out so that if somebody gets drawn together and neither of them has a boat, well, then we got to try to switch it off with some people that are together that both have boats. But we've given the opportunity for people to learn even without having the boats. And we did programs for kids, and we have people come in and talk to the club about different things every now and then. Go through things with the Department of Natural Resource wardens for clarification on different things. So it's a good thing to be. It's a good type of thing if you like to fish or you're just getting started in and want to learn more. Looking for a club in your area of some kind is a pretty good thing to do. I've never, I was been in it for 30 to 35 years. There's only a few of us left that have been in it that were in it that long, and one less now that I'm not. But I'll still fish with some of the guys that are there. I make myself available with a boat if somebody needs to go out. We've done things with a couple of the high schools. The high schools are now in the area getting involved in fishing clubs. One started out with an ice fishing club, which I don't ice fish because I hate the cold. But we took kids out from one of the local high schools a couple of years ago, right before COVID in summer, and I had 5 or 6 boats with 2 kids in each boat, plus me or whoever from the club was in. They owned the boat, and we took them around for the day on the lake and tried to get them places where they would, be able to catch some fish, and then we'd give them some instructions on the water, like what do you like to fish with? Well, I like this. Well, here's how you would be best to fish it, and tried to get them to use the bait the best way to use it so they could catch fish on it. So it turned out pretty well. We're going to do it again, I think, at some point. Once now that COVID ever gets done, but it was enjoyable to do that.
Fantastic,
Up the
fantastic.
handicap from where I worked, the Wisconsin Outdoor Journal magazine that we published, the people that used to run that took handicapped people out. So they asked me to help out one year. So we did. Took a gentleman that had a stroke out and his wife, and I was lucky enough to drop the anchor on a big school of bluegills, I guess, because we sat there for 3.5 hours and caught fish as fast as we could throw in. And
Wow.
they enjoyed it, and we enjoyed it, and it was just a lot of fun doing it. And knowing that they felt good doing it, and knowing we did something to help them, made me feel very, very good.
Wow. You know, that is very interesting. I had done a podcast episode last month in December. We published with a young lady named Kelsey Roseth, and she is a outdoor enthusiast like you. Very much, she has a disability. She has a issue with her spine, and
Yeah.
her sport of choice is birding. And it got me to thinking, I wonder what other disabilities in outdoor adventure can come together and be just that, to have that experience. And you just described that, somebody that just had the stroke, kids with or maybe a developmental disability just want to the experience and enjoyment of being out on the water. And so you've definitely sparked some curiosity in me for some future episodes. So I appreciate that, Tom.
The interesting thing, basically, just on a side note about that, is when you are fishing, you can go into a store and spend $10 to $15 on a fishing pole and reel if you want to, just for plunking around, or you can spend probably upwards of $1,000 for a setup if you're crazy. Which I, but one of the nice things about that is when I was in addition to doing outdoor writing and working for Krause Publication, the hobby publisher and the outdoor publisher that I worked with on those titles, I did work with Zepco, the company. They were the company that first introduced the closed space reel, which made it easier for people to fish. And I got to go to I used to work with the sales rep on their field staff in Wisconsin. So I went to a lot of trade shows with him. And then if he needed some help with a seminar or an outdoor type thing, he'd call me and say, "Hey, you feel like going over here this weekend? These guys need some help with this." And I'd like to help them out doing it. So I would go over and do whatever they needed. At that point, what do you want to talk about? What do your people need to know? All kinds of stuff like that. So I think that was, that was unique. I felt good about that because in a lot of cases, you were introducing people to fishing.
Right, right.
I was kind of big on that because I know how my life went because of fishing.
Definitely. And I just I look back, I'm thinking, I'm sure when I was very, very young, I'm sure I had a pole in my hand, but it's just, it's a memory. I can't picture it. So, but I know there's something there. It's way back in the vault. But when I hear my great nephew, just 4 years old, and still enjoys fishing, I'm thinking that's cool. And it doesn't hurt that they have a little pond behind the house that they can go fishing in. So that works out too. Hey, listen, Tom, before we head out today, just want to confirm we're going to send some folks to the Midwest Outdoors website because I know some of your articles are there. And we'll also provide the backlinks to On Wisconsin Outdoors. If you're open to putting together, some of those instructions, and we're happy to share those with our listeners, where would the best place for them to go to request that information?
I think if they just send me an email, I could come up with some information for them. I could retype up a clean copy of how to basically, and get it to them, and then they could take it from there. They could request a catalog from a supplier, look them up online. There are also a million sites out there that people have that are related to fishing, and if they find stuff through Midwest Outdoors and On Wisconsin Outdoors, that's good. But if they went in the website, into the internet and just queried largemouth bass, for instance, you will find a whole lot of information on that. If you read bluegills, crappies, smallmouth bass, northern pike, walleyes, muskies, fish like that we have up in Wisconsin, you'll find articles about them, and you'll get an idea of what you need to do if you want to get started in them.
Fantastic. We'll definitely provide the link to your email address on our show notes. Before we head out today, Tom, is there any other final thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners and an insight? I mean, we have in Success Insight that we have what we call an insight to go, which is an opportunity for our listeners to, read an article, a book, go to a website. You've kind of alluded to some of this, but any final thoughts you'd like to leave for our listeners today?
If it's to start fishing, there's stuff out there for beginners. There's stuff out there for people that have been fishing 30, 40, 50 years, in terms of what's happening. Because every year it piles another layer of whatever is new in the industry, on top of what you learned last year and the year before and the year before. So eventually, if you start with that beginning layer, you can probably progress pretty much up through it until you get up to where you decide that you want to fish a lot. Then you got to start learning enough to make it worthwhile. But the other stuff you can get a good start on. And there's nothing wrong with catching a 5 pound bass on a $15 or $20 tackle a rod and reel simply because you were fishing in the right place at the right time.
Sounds like a plan. So that's probably going to be me. Yeah. Listen, Tom, it's been a pleasure to have you on the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast, and we truly appreciate you taking the time. And it's our first episode for 2022. So thank you so much. And I definitely look forward to seeing you again and chatting, breaking bread, and hopefully getting out on a boat with you up in Wisconsin.
And I appreciate the opportunity to do about it. Like, thank you for that. It was a lot of fun doing.
Fantastic. Well, listen, stay on the line. We're going to do a short close and you and I can have a final part to our conversation. Okay.
Okay.
All right, folks. What a pleasurable way to start the new year having Tom Luba. He is a fishing enthusiast, a Jig Craftsman, a freelance outdoor writer, really passionate about open water fishing, crappies, smallmouth bass, largemouth bass, and then some. And just really, I mean, as I had alluded to earlier, I mean, he spent his entire, almost his entire life, as long as he can remember, going out with his aunt and uncle and brother fishing. And really that passion for fishing has just carried on to today, and just really went beyond just going into the local bait and tackle shop or sports store, and really became a craftsman in building his own jigs. And we're going to have up on our show notes some of the photos that accompany the part of the conversation we had with Tom today. He's also going to share a couple photos of just his outdoor adventures, especially with the great grandkids and grandkids. And really just what a way to, just to get interested in this wonderful sport. And just anytime we can get outdoors, the peace, the quiet, doing something you love, and just, again, that passion for 30 some years of just, or more, and then some, of just doing what you love. And there's no better way to live life than to look back and say, something, I've enjoyed what I've been doing. And, fishing, I mean, it's been a common thread throughout many of the conversations we've had on the Outdoor Adventure Series, is getting started in a sport early, and that sport has taken them to new experiences and adventures. So we hope you too enjoyed today's episode with Tom. Do check us out on our website, the Outdoor Adventure Series.com. We're also going to have the episode up on Success Insight Podcast, as well as the podcasting platforms, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcast, Amazon Music, Pandora, Audible, and Spotify, where this episode will be on our Outdoor Adventure Series playlist. And wherever you are and decide to listen to these episodes, do leave us some comments. Let us know your thoughts on today's episode. Do share it with your friends, write a review, whatever feels right for you in the moment. And also, if you are interested in the directions, we're either going to put his email address on our show notes, or we'll perhaps put it up on a Dropbox or Google Drive folder. We'll get you a link to it, but we'll definitely make those directions available to you. Okay, folks, take care of yourself. And again, we hope you enjoyed our first episode of the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast for 2022. This is Howard Fox, your host, and we will see you again soon. Take care now.